Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security. The Cognitive Crucible is a forum that presents different perspectives and emerging thought leadership related to the information environment. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of or endorsement by the Information Professionals Association.
My guest today on the Cognitive Crucible is Brian Russell, who is a recently retired colonel in the United States Marine Corps. While part of U.S. Cyber Command, he served in the Fires and Effects Division and subsequently served as the J5 Plans Director of Joint Task Force Ares. Most recently, he commanded 2 MEF Information Group in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, where he provided joint all-domain effects for the MEF commander, 2nd and 6th Fleets, and multiple key allies and partners. Brian Russell, welcome back to the Cognitive Crucible.
John, thanks so much. It is great to be back with the Cognitive Crucible. It is one of those podcasts that's on my must-listen list. Anytime anyone asks me, how do I keep track of the information space, information warfare, OIE, we'll talk about today. It's just subscribe to the Cognitive Crucible is what I tell them. So thanks for what you do and what for Information Professionals Association does for the community, John.
Absolutely. So the conversation I'd like to have with you today will cover what you call OIE Truths. And you've written about these truths, and it's an article that was in the Marine Corps Gazette. I think it was about 2 years ago now. Anyway, there's a link in the show notes to this article, and I certainly recommend that everybody go and read the article. So we'd like to talk to you about your OIE truths. But before we get into this topic, could we get an update from you? So you first came on to the podcast back in November of 2020, and we'll have a link to that in the show notes as well. What have you been up to since then?
Yeah, thanks, John. Great podcast back then, too. I think I was sharing my thoughts on an article I'd written with Brigadier General Lonnie Anderson and Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Fleischacker on our experience at Joint Task Force Ares fighting ISIS in cyberspace and, what could apply across maybe the broader DoD, its forces, but particularly the Marine Corps being Marines. And that certainly informed my thoughts going into command of 2 MEF Information Group. I was just a few months into command at the time we last spoke. And so spent the next couple of years after that podcast really refining and shaping what I thought certainly 2 MIG's approach was, certainly 2 MEF, Marine Expeditionary Force, that's the 3-star command I worked for, how we do this thing called operations in the information environment. New space for the Marine Corps, not a ton of doctrine out there on it. And so I had wide latitude as the commanding officer to implement some approaches and ways of doing business, so to speak. And so really appreciate the opportunity to come on this cast and share some of that, kind of give back to the community what we learned over those 2 years when I was in command of 2 MIG.
Right. And another shout out to MEF, file this under MEF related. We also had a discussion with one of your subordinate commanders, Brian Schweers, just a couple of months ago, and he discussed Anglico's all-domain effects team concept. As I recall, and link in the show notes for this as well, as I recall, Brian was describing this as still very much conceptual, but a prototype. Has any kind of an update regarding the all-domain effects team?
I think the overall approach has borne out and is continuing to be implemented not only in 2 MIG, but some of the sister MIGs on the West Coast and overseas in Okinawa. So 1 MIG and 3 MIG taking very similar approaches. And the broad approach, John, I think we'll talk about this more during the cast, is finding a way to bring disparate capabilities together that can complement one another in something akin to like a 21st century combined arms model. Not just kinetic combined arms, which we're all accustomed to growing up in the Marine Corps, but how do we apply these other capabilities, which are more and more prevalent nowadays, cyber, space domain, bringing disparate capabilities together to produce greater outcomes on behalf of a commander. That's really what the all-domain effects team concept was all about. And I had the authority to do that as the MIG commander, bring other capabilities from across the entire MEF information group, cored around that Anglico team, and we put that into practice. And yeah, so I continue to hear from the folks there at 2MIG. They're still doing that type of approach. And again, I think that we're finding that across the Marine Corps as well.
Right. All right, well, let's start talking OIE Truths. And so, as we mentioned, this was back in the April 2021 timeframe, came out in the Marine Corps Gazette. Why did you write on this?
Couple different reasons. One, I won't call it a task, but let's call it strong encouragement from the Deputy Commandant of Information at the time, Lieutenant General Lori Reynolds. I think she was a guest on the Cognitive Crucible, John.
A friend of the show. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the April edition of the Marine Corps Gazette is the OIE edition, Operations Information Environment edition. And Lieutenant General Reynolds put out to all the MEF Information Group commanders, hey, let's get some writing. Let's get some examples out to the Marine Corps of what this OIE is really all about, what it looks like, how you all are doing it. And so, okay, yes, ma'am, a message received. But also I've been a member of the Gazette editorial panel since 2005. I feel like I should contribute in some sense, and it is a good way of getting information out about what we're doing. That's a conversation unto itself, John. What I found in some of our capability areas, cyber and space, you quickly deal with classified information, and it's very difficult to write about in an unclassified manner. So very proud of some of my subordinate commanders, like Lieutenant Colonel Schweers, you mentioned. I had officers and Marines from across all battalions in the MIG publish in subsequent issues of the Gazette during my 2 years of the command, just getting those ideas out there. And very important to do because at the time, like I mentioned, this is pre-doctrine in some cases. MCDP-8 information was not published as of yet. JP3 TAC 04, you've had a podcast on that new doctrine on, operations information environment, OIE forces. That wasn't written down, John. So as a MEF information group commander, and oftentimes I would have peers from across the MEF, from across the service ask me, like, well, how do you do this? Like, what does OIE mean? And so I thought it'd just be useful to write it down. And my approach was not necessarily how to do it, but here's how to think about operations information environment.
You mentioned just a moment ago, Brian, that April is the Marine Corps Gazette's OIE month. Is that a annual recurring thing?
Yeah, it certainly is, John. The current editor of the Gazette, Chris Woodbridge, aligns basically a topic or a function for each month of the Gazette. And he settled on April as the OIE edition. One that's related to that is our McKisry edition. So Marine Corps Intelligence, Surveillance, Reconnaissance Enterprise is in September of every year. So yeah, certainly if any of the listeners would like to get something in about OIE right now, January, February, great time to get the April edition. If you need a little more time, summertime to hit the September edition would be very well received by the editor.
I'll include a link in the show notes for them, for interested people to find out information about how to submit an article. All right, excellent. Well, so maybe we can start stepping into the OIE Truths from this April 2021 article. Do you think you could describe them and maybe give some examples of, to help make your case?
Yeah, certainly can. And let me start with the scene setter. What, I start the article with is just what prompted, the example of what this looks like was my Marines participating in a force-on-force exercise at Camp Lejeune. So Marines versus Marines, but one plays blue, one plays red, one's the bad guy. And my team was on the adversary force. So they were playing the red. And what happened in the midst of this exercise is, and I, changed the names to protect the not so innocent, but Lieutenant Colonel Beltfed, the maneuver commander, if you will, receives this text on his cell phone from Lance Corporal Drinkwater. And what it is a social media post from Lance Corporal Drinkwater that's criticizing his commander, criticizing the exercise, very much in violation of cell phone policy use in the field, John, right? Don't take your phone to the field. Don't turn it on. You're vulnerable to targeting, right? Well, my goodness, what is Lance Corporal Drinkwater doing? Texting, and putting out on Facebook, disparaging comments about his commander and the exercise. And I will spare your audience the colorful language that was used, but I'm sure everyone can fill in the blanks for that. Well, John, it was all fake news. Those social media posts were all created by my team, essentially, and it was a multidisciplinary team, and it started weeks in advance of the exercise. And the few disciplines that were at play, John, just real quickly, was counterintelligence Marines. You know what they're really good at? They're really good at doing own force evaluation of where your vulnerabilities are. And what they typically do is, just dress like a Marine. They walk right into your headquarters looking like they belong there. And they just go rummaging around, John. They look for personnel files. They look for maybe safes that are open. And it's all in the help, idea of making that unit better. They'll give you a report at the end and say, hey, here's where we found all your abilities. Well, in this case, they were patrolling around that exercise force headquarters weeks in advance of the exercise and found the personnel rosters. So they take the personnel rosters back and they give that to my Comstrat Marines, who looks in the social media environment all the time. Right, John? They're out there in social media. They're doing research and analysis. They're gaining access to publicly available information on the exercise participants. And guess what they found? They found that Lance Corporal Drinkwater was a very prolific social media user, had a lot of information and content out there. So Snap took some screenshots of Lance Corporal Drinkwater's social media feeds, and then they turned that over to my graphics section within the Communications and Strategy Operations Company, and they created the fake news. It made it look very real, just really good posts. And so from there, they turned those fake news posts over to my PsyOps Marines. And my PsyOps Marines were the one that, in the midst of the exercise, as soon as Lance Corporal Drinkwater was captured, sent that text to the exercise force commander saying, we've captured Lance Corporal Drinkwater and look what we found on his phone. So right away, very believable, right, John? True. What would Lieutenant Colonel Beltfed be inclined to believe about a Lance Corporal? Yeah, sometimes they disobey orders and bring their phones to the field.
It's been known to happen.
They've been known to criticize their commanders. They've been known to complain about the exercise. And so your audience knows this. The adversary force team was pushing Lieutenant Colonel Beltfed towards what he was already inclined to believe. But what that did was that brought him off the mission. He was literally considering charging Lance Corporal Drinkwater and, hey, pause, time out, bring him in. And the exercise control folks had to say, it's all fake news. Like, slow your roll. But it pulled him off the mission, John. That was the whole idea. So, that leads into the truths. It's just a construct, and I can talk as we go through these. But the very first one, and yes, I did steal some of this from the soft truths. If your audience is familiar with those, there's 5 truths about special operations forces, and I had spent some time in our Marine component, special operations forces. So that was my construct. But really, the first one is very close to a soft truth, but it is humans are in fact more important than hardware. And while the soft truth focuses on the friendly operator, and you just can't make those very quickly, and you really need to invest in them, I was more inclined to, it's the adversary human we always have to focus on. Sometimes as a U.S. enterprise, very much focused on platforms. How do we destroy the tank? How do we destroy the ship? How do we, combat those aspects of the system? But really, complete system behavior is driven by the people in charge, by the humans. And so the target here was Lieutenant Colonel Beltfed. And it was understanding how Lieutenant Colonel Beltfed behaved, which has really led to that team's ability to influence his behavior, right? We knew he was inclined to believe Lance Corporal Drinkwater was disobeying orders and he was making disparaging remarks. We knew him well enough to influence them in a certain way. And so that's what if you're going to do OIE, you really need to get after the cognitive space. And it's really hard to do if you just show up to combat, so to speak, and you haven't done that intelligence research on those individuals, or you don't have knowledge of how the complete system behaves. You got to do that from the very beginning. And that's why humans are more important than hardware, John.
Right. So, and doesn't that really just kind of cut to the heart of the matter, in that influence ultimately is about affecting human decision making. So having humans as as an integral part of your number one OIE truth, that helps keep that front and center, I would think.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Complete system behavior, systems driven by humans and decision makers and commanders. So my view is you start there in considering that behavior. But the way my team, at least in this exercise construct, was successful is, remember what I mentioned. The fight, so to speak, started weeks in advance of the exercise itself, and that's why OIE truth number 2 is OIE really requires a campaigning, a competition, and kind of collaboration mindset. You got to be in it for the long haul. You have to have this kind of persistent engagement with the adversary system to learn it, to know it, to find where the vulnerabilities are. And I certainly, we may have talked about this on the last podcast, but as I was leaving U.S. Cyber Command, General Nakasone had assumed command of Cybercom, implemented a persistent engagement strategy from a cyber domain perspective, same type of thing. Let's not wait for the cyber adversary to be in our systems before we do anything about it. Let's get out forward, defend forward. Let's engage with the system. And I think the same thing applies to, certainly in my case, Marine forces, but really any of our DoD forces. And I think is in line with where the Commandant is driving the Marine Corps, this concept of stand-in forces, forward deployed, wrestling with the system, understanding the system, having a level of persistence with the system so you know how it's going to behave. Like I told a lot of folks, if we just deploy into an environment, you ask me for OIE, it's almost too late. Like, I got to really know that system inside and out to bring specific and unique capabilities to bear against that system. And just to the collaboration mindset, notice how the capability I was providing was a collaborative task organized capability, intelligence, the comstrat, the psyops. There's a whole host of capabilities out there that when they're brought together, they're more impactful working together than separately. Again, something akin to a 21st century combined arms model is what we're seeing. So that's why OIE truth number 2 is you gotta be in it for the long haul. Got to campaign. Got to compete.
Yeah. Let me recap a story that I just heard, and actually it was from this fellow that I've also invited to be on the podcast here in a couple of weeks. He's done a lot of thinking about cognitive security and what cognitive security means, and so we'll unpack that during that discussion. But I want to ask you if you think that this story fits into truth number 2, especially the campaigning portion of it. So he tells a story about there was like a group of SEALs were tasked to red team some base security, and for weeks and weeks and weeks, this team tried to figure out a way to breach the security, and they were trying to like come in through, not through the gates, but over fences and ways that would not be desirable for people to access the base. And over and over and over again, the SEALs kept on being discovered by hidden cameras and stuff like this. So eventually what the SEALs wound up experimenting with and figuring out was catching bunny rabbits, and using the bunny rabbits to trip the security cameras. And when they first started doing this, the base security folks would immediately, go out there like, what happened? Let's investigate. And when they discovered that there was nothing there, they started thinking, well, maybe there's a glitch in our cameras, or this, that, and the other. Anyway, the SEALs kept on doing this, tripping the camera feeds with rabbits, and over time, the base security folks, started discounting this alerting mechanism more and more and more. And so the time it would take for the security folks to arrive would grew longer and longer, until eventually they were like, forget it, it's just another false alarm. And then the SEALs were able to infiltrate finally, after the base security folks had been like fooled into believing that these were false alarms. But anyway, that to me seems like it's a creative way of campaigning in order to eventually be able to hack the system. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that. That's interacting, wrestling with, engaging with that system well in advance to tune it to a certain level of behavior that you can then exploit. And there's even a cyber aspect of that. People are inclined to believe their computers don't work from time to time. How do you hide in the noise as a cyberspace operator? Well, create some of your own noise, and it becomes just, oh yeah, computers being glitchy. Oops, no, it's you got problems inside your computer. So yeah, I think that is absolutely part and parcel, John.
Yeah, so I guess the SEALs were eventually able to hack the system, but it was after many, many, many failed attempts. So I'm not sure how practical that is in a real world scenario, but it makes the case that there are where there's a will, there's a way to campaign and eventually defeat systems with enough persistence.
Yeah, certainly. And I'm even reminded of MCDP8 information where it describes direct and indirect approaches to achieve your objective. And that bunny rabbit is just an indirect approach to achieve the same objective.
Yeah. All right. So that's number 2. OIE requires campaigning, competition, and collaboration. What's number 3?
Number 3, and I could probably even tie it back to the bunny rabbit story, John. So thanks for bringing that
You
one
bet.
in. So yeah, we'll see how many times we can tie that in. But
Happy to help. Yeah.
Yeah, number 3 is OIE requires agility across authorities. And remember what my model and construct was 3 disparate capabilities that all are leveraging their authorities to do things: counter intel to collect, Comstrat to look, and then PSYOPs to deliver. Right? All various. We can criticize stovepiped authorities in some sense, and it takes a long time to get access to some of those authorities sometimes. But that's the magic, right? That is looking at a task organized team and basically leveraging everyone's capabilities together. And not unlike what we were starting to do in Helmand Province, John, when we were down there working with the Brits right next door, right? We were operating under US rules of engagement. Brits were operating under NATO rules of engagements. Depending on what the situation was, either one of us may have not been able to take the shot, so to speak, against the insurgents, but maybe the other was. And if we were just collaborating, we could slide that target package across the desk and still accomplish the mission under someone else's authorities. The OIE space, these other domains is no different if you approach it that way. And that's what I mean by some agility across authorities is really necessary in this world.
And creativity. I'm also hearing, kind of woven through all of this, the ability to be creative and persistent in order to accomplish what needs to be done.
So if I didn't share this on our last podcast, let me use this opportunity to say what I've believed for a long, long time is that Marines in particular are like the original hackers. And I don't mean that from a true cyber perspective like a lot of people think about it nowadays, but it's just what you described, John. Is like, I have a problem in front of me. I have a certain set of tools that are designed to do one thing and maybe not necessarily solve the problem. But if I play around with those tools for a little bit, I'll find a solution to the problem. And my whole career has just been count after count after count of Marines just coming up with really creative solutions using one system designed for one thing, and they find another way to do it for another thing. And you're exactly right. Just the creativity in this space is really necessary.
All right. Truth number 4.
Okay, so quantity is a quality all its own sometimes. And what I mean by that is back to this idea of 21st century combined arms, of putting Lieutenant Colonel Beltfed on the horns of a dilemma. And not only did my team send him the fake news about Lance Corporal Drinkwater, but they were also sending him injects about, get this, John, tornado warnings in some of the training area where his forces were. We had a hurricane brewing off the coast at the time. This was a couple days before Index, end of the exercise. We knew the bad weather was coming, but again, Lieutenant Colonel Beltfed was inclined to believe, I might have some bad weather there out in the training area. And so, okay, pause, time out, let's do stand down. Only be told by XCON a little time later, no, that was fake news too. But it was just throwing Lieutenant Colonel Beltfed off his game, just being hit with this and this and this, and just throwing him off his game, having to react to multiple instances of quote unquote fake news. I'll pause there, and maybe I'll preview what might be a 6th or 7th OIE truth, if you will, is sometimes it's really hard to replicate an information environment. I think that's probably my sixth truth. I haven't written the article yet, but yeah, it's really hard to create a social media environment just for training. It's really hard to just, right, John, just create the internet just for training type of things. And just two aspects of that. It took us about 2 months to get approval to send that text message to Lieutenant Colonel Belfed's phone using a government system through commercial cellular provider here in Lejeune. We had to get the lawyers involved in that, John. It just took a period of time. But another aspect is, do we have the exercise control mechanisms in place to maybe protect the force from a bad decision that's made when Lieutenant Colonel Belfed is under the influence truly of the adversary force, and the decision he makes based on incorrect information puts Marines' lives in danger. That's something I'm not sure we've thought through fully. We're very good in the kinetic space, right, John? Space and time deconfliction, make sure no one gets shot. What does cognitive space and time deconfliction mean when it relates to decision making? If he had taken that tornado warning message and done something to truly harm the force because of that, I'm not sure exercise control was ready for that at the time, because my team was just very aggressive about influencing Lieutenant Colonel Belfed. So it's something to consider in the training environment. Do we have those mechanisms in place to, if we want to influence, we want to deceive, are we doing it appropriately? Because certainly we don't want to get the Marines hurt in training.
Wow. Yeah. Two comments on this. We're going to have lots of links in the show notes to previous episodes. So one the episode that came out right before this episode drops, I believe, is with a Army Lieutenant Colonel Brian Burbank, and Brian is the Ghost Team lead for Army's TRADOC Training Command out in Fort Irwin, California, where they have it's like they're the Army's version of 29 Palms, except it is like everything related to operations in the information environment. So they have a full spectrum exercise location designed for brigade-sized units to come in and get the in living color experience of what it might be like to be fighting kinetically, but also having all kinds of information rounds thrown at you as you were describing there. So the Army has actually is taken gone to great lengths to replicate an exercise information environment. Do the Marines have their own version of that kind of a exercise environment?
The Marine Corps has certainly invested very heavily in what you recognize, John, as our premier training area, 29 Palms, California, in terms of replicating spectrum and replicating cyber threats. We'll bring in other cyber forces to play the cyber adversary. So yeah, the Marine Corps has chosen to invest in its premier training ground out there in 29 Palms, California, much like the Army has out at Irwin.
Yeah. And the second thing I wanted to comment on was your fourth OIE truth, quantity being a quality all of its own. And I mentioned this in the episode with Brian as well, but something I've been thinking a lot about lately is the concept of variety. And if there is a greater variety of activities present within the operating environment, then that spectrum of variety is very challenging to grapple with, and I think that might be part of the point that you were making with quantity as a quality all of its own.
Yeah, I think in that particular context, when we still think a lot about how we're doing signature management as a Marine Corps or just DoD writ large, is we all recognize now it's going to be hard to hide. What can I do to raise the noise floor to make it harder for the enemy to detect me? Because there's more noise out there, more variety, if you will. John, I certainly think that's applicable. The other aspect of this quantity being a quality all its own is I think Ukraine and what P.W. Singer talked about early in the conflict about pre-bunking, getting the truth out in advance, getting before it's harder to debunk than it is to really get the right message out early. So I think that's an aspect too. When MCDP 8 talks about the three pillars, if you will, of information advantage, prevailing narrative is one of them. Well, be telling the story. Be telling the story often. Be telling the story to the audiences that matter. Get that out there. That's very important to do, I think. And it's also part of quantity is a quality all its own.
Yeah. Okay, so number 5.
All right, and I need to give credit to Lieutenant Colonel Mike Grice, a mentor of mine. He was my gunnery instructor at Fort Sill, had command of 1st Anglico back 2008, 2010 timeframe. That was his motto for 1st Anglico, everybody fights. And the idea was it didn't matter if you were a motor T Marine in Anglico, he was going to train that Marine to get on a radio and call for fire. You might have to do that. If the fire observer, is a casualty, like, hey, jump on the radio, you're going to make the mission happen. I think the same thing applies to OIE, John. All of our Marines need to be aware of the information environment, what their vulnerabilities might be, or what the opportunities are and how they can exploit even at the individual level. And like I share in the article, Lieutenant Colonel Beltfed, Lance Corporal Drinkwater may not have been aware of the impact of their actions in the IE, Lance Corporal Drinkwater out there, prolific social media. Well, that was used to exploit a little bit. We all need to be aware of that. Again, one of those pillars of information advantage per Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication 8, force resiliency. We need to do a lot, just make sure our force is resilient against the threat. And everybody's in this information environment every single day. And we need to be aware of that. I think that documentary on Netflix, The Social Dilemma, is one of those must-watch documentaries. Not only is the technology designed to addict us, John, but now our adversaries try and take that technology to continue to fracture our society or to continue to exploit a vulnerability inside one of our units. We got to pay attention to that. So it's not, hey, this is too complicated, it's too technical, this information. No, you're in it. You need to recognize that reality.
Yeah, and right now, I mean, even service members that are within the United States right now, not deployed. Everybody is being influenced and targeted and campaigned and data collected on, like, right now, without exception. And I think that these truths, there could probably be like a societal analog to these military OIE truths, right? And number 5 would be something like, everybody within the society is being targeted and influenced, whether they realize it or not. And being mindful of that is important.
Agree 100% on that, John.
All right, so we're breaking news here, Brian. So you've already talked a little bit about your next 5 OIE truths. So you've got 6 through 10. Maybe you can review them real quick.
Yeah, certainly not fully formulated, and there's some danger in that. But
that's right.
My last year in command, I kept jotting them down. Like, hey, I keep seeing these patterns, if you will, things that just keep coming back. And like I said, number 6 we already mentioned, really hard to replicate an information environment. Maybe have some work to do creating the most robust training environments possible. Per our last point, everybody fights. Number 7 is OIE requires intense focus. I don't think my team in that exercise would have been as successful if they asked the PSYOP teams that influence the company commander and influence the truck driver and influence they went after Lieutenant Colonel Beltfed, and that was their singular focus. And so they were able to bring all of their capacity to bear on a single target. And certainly that has impacts for our intelligence enterprise as well. If you want good OIE, pick a target and pull it apart so you can influence it appropriately when the time comes. Number 8 is kind of an interesting one. Don't buy or build what you can get for free. And what I mean by that is there's a whole host of available capabilities proliferating the globe right now that you can leverage. Part of what my team was doing at the MiG was leveraging traffic cameras publicly available across the world to spot naval traffic going through the Danish Straits, John. You mentioned in the intro, we were supporting 6th Fleet for most of my time. in command. The commandant has us on a naval integration pathway. So we worked a lot with Sixth Fleet. And again, the commandant's path is, what can we do? I think one of our deputy commanding generals said this about force design. It's not, we got off message early. In his mind, it was not about the missiles. It's about the sensors that we bring, a stand-in force that's always looking. Well, John, I had access to sensors from Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, halfway across the planet. So I had Marines that could look, like I said, at traffic cam feeds off the Great Danish Bridge and look at naval traffic below that. And we could just tip that to the fleet if we found something of interest. There's a whole Coast Watcher community, John, that does the same thing. Watch the Russian vessel come out of port and they take a snap. They're putting out on Twitter or whatever. Hey, look at this. That's all free stuff, John. So don't buy an exquisite tool. Don't build a new system if you can just find things out there for free. I think that's just a good, Marine efficient way of doing business.
That's right. That's right. When you've got limited budgets, do what you can without cost.
That's right. And again, back to one of my points, I think Marines are just hackers by nature. They just love figuring this stuff out and being creative. Number 9, you really do need people in the right places. So if you want agility across authorities, in some cases, you have to put maybe a liaison officer at a component in a combatant command, or even at the combatant command level, to just make your case, maybe get that con-op across the finish line to explain what's going on. And again, some of these capabilities are new. And, in the military, John, commanders own all the risk. And so they need a good explanation of what's being proposed and, what is the risk of employing a new tool or a new approach in the IE. So you really need people in the right places across an enterprise to help get some of these target packages, if you will, across the finish line. And then the last one is probably just a military truth, but the commander sets the tone. If the commander is interested in OIE, then the whole unit will be interested in OIE, and you will get the focus and you will get the force resiliency and the training on it. And the like. And so the units that I saw most successful at taking either all domain approaches or implementing OIE were the ones where the commanders cared about, and they put a priority on it. And so, yeah, that's a preview of the next 5. John, there might be a Gazette article in there.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I'm sure the community looks forward to, appreciates getting the preview and looks forward to, hearing your thoughts in black and white. So would like to start closing out, Brian, and see if you can offer up a research topic that an interested student might take a crack at.
Yeah, I'll give it my best try, because I listened to the episode with Ed Hollinsworth, and what did he call himself, John? A pracademic, practicing academic, and he definitely had some well-formulated research questions. I'll take a minute to validate what he was saying. Disparate capabilities and how to bring those together. Fully agree. What does Intel support to OIE look like? Again, if you want to influence the complete system, you need to understand the complete system and find the vulnerability in it. And that requires some intense focus. So I validate all of those. The one that's on my mind, John, is how do we establish a model for I'll call it conditions-based command and control. What I mentioned, OIE requires agility across authorities. Can we have a construct where a force that is trained and certified to a certain standard can be quickly chopped to a command with the authority to implement that capability? And I'm thinking the cyber domain, a Marine force trained to a U.S. Cybercom standard, can they quickly fall under U.S. Cyber command and control for a period of time to quote unquote take the shot and then back to the regular command? I think there's space in there for figuring out how we can be more agile with our authorities across units and forces. So I call it conditions-based command and control, quick changes based on the conditions to implement some of these capabilities a little bit quicker.
So teams being formed quickly for a discrete purpose, and then disbanding just as quickly after the mission has been pursued, or something along those lines.
Certainly. And there are Marines, my experiences at 2MEF and Camp Lejeune, that have training and capability to project information power across the globe, but no authority to do it, right? We sit, we train, we form, deploy forward. We work for a combatant commander, right? At that point, and authorities come. But if I've got the capacity to do that and I offer that up, how do we quickly change the command and control construct to enable them to take that shot on behalf of a commander that owns the risk, certainly, but there's probably some space to improve a model like that. And I'd love to see some research on that, John.
Right, and back to your authorities' agility as well. So Yeah. No, I'm sure that somebody at the Naval Postgraduate School or one of our other military institutions of higher learning could have a good time exploring all of that space. Yeah, good stuff. Finally, Brian, do you have a book suggestion that people might want to check out?
Yeah, I'll offer two. The first one is one I recently read. It's called Range by David Epstein, and he makes a case for generalism. And what he means by that is our society for many, many years, and if you even think about the military services, focus on specialization. You get a degree in something coming out of college, and you spend a career doing that one thing. In the military, I'm an artillery officer growing up. Yeah, I'm going to train you to do artillery, and you just do artillery. He says because of our complicated problems nowadays, those with a broader range of experiences and skills are usually better at solving those problems, or at least being able to form teams of specialists to help solve the problems. And I think that resonated with me, John, because like we started this podcast, my job at the MIG was bringing disparate capabilities together, helping them figure out how to work with one another and produce an outcome together. And it just seemed a leadership tool in my kit bag I needed the older I got. In the military, generalist, obviously, we create general officers, but it's a great description of how to have a more generalist mindset towards things. And then the second one is Brief by Joseph McCormick. And what I also found later in my career is the ability to succinctly describe that complexity to decision makers, or the technical aspects of some of our IRC cyberspace is very, very helpful and very, very useful. So either visually or in writing, how do you very quickly condense to the essence of a topic to prompt a decision? Brief is just a wonderful book to help folks think how to do that. And so I've got a twofer for you there, John, on recommended reads.
Yeah, for sure. Two comments, one on each. Uh, for range and the whole bit about generalists, I think that there's another touch point with a theme for this whole podcast series, is that interdisciplinary work is very much in vogue these days, and having a generalist mindset, I think, is helpful for bringing in a whole bunch of disparate ideas and synthesizing them and producing something new or something valuable from that kind of a generalist approach. So I'm definitely going to get that book. And then Brief, I think I saw this make the rounds on LinkedIn over the holidays. I saw a couple of LinkedIn posts that mention this book. But yeah, what an art form it is to be able to say something succinctly, without jargon, and in a way that a decision maker can get it without taxing the cognitive load of the decision maker more. It's an art form that needs that definitely needs to be practiced. So, man, those are fantastic suggestions. And with that, Brian Russell, thank you so much for being a return guest on the Cognitive Crucible.
John, thanks so much. My pleasure. Absolutely. Thanks again to you and the IPA for continuing the dialogue in this critical aspect of cognitive security. Thanks so much.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.